I'm here to share some information about the Crone archetype and specifically feeling into the energy of the Cailleach, Celtic Crone goddess, the hag of winter. She is more than the Celtic equivalent of the Baba Yaga energy. She is oftentimes depicted or described as a triple goddess, or one of the faces of the triple goddess, with links and associations and connections to Bridie, Bridget. And I very much associate her as a shamanic archetype of the life, death, rebirth cycle, and the triple face elements that her character touches on, and the skills that she has in terms of being able to reflect these different stages of cycle and transition to us, very much embodied in that turn into the winter and the visible indicators we have to stimulate that feeling of transition into a release process, into shedding, into a hibernation of sorts, or an internal world which is very much about coming into a deeper space of rest and reflection and cultivation, whilst these external elements or weather has an impact or influence on our psyche, on our mood, on our perspective and intuition, that the transition that she brings of this energy of darkness and turning in for the longer nights ahead is very much softened by her presence. There's often indicators of this shift coming through sensations of anticipation. For many, that kind of foreboding sense of the turn into winter, indicated by seasonal depression or just a kind of lackluster energy that many people, depending on what time of year you're born in and where your energy is best placed for the cycle, the darkening days do present many with this preemptive feeling, maybe some worries or anxieties coming up, also in tandem with the turning towards the end of the year and the resolution of cycles or reflections that have been going on. Things are beginning to come to a close and an unfolding. And going back from this winter period to the Samhain portal and the autumn equinox is often when I start to feel into and tap into that energy that is present, and from that point is ever growing, ever quickening. And it is a very powerful time of year for creative exploration and for spiritual reflection, because of this additional factor of the elements and the external environment kind of goading us into this space and encouraging this sense of it's time to take stock, it's time to take inventory, it's time to maybe weed out things that are not serving us in the best possible way. Time to make a decision about what we wish to carry with us into those darker months, whether there are some things that we could let go of to lighten the load, so that as we go into this period of time that's almost inviting the kind of death, rebirth stage, where we're kind of unfolding from that energy, then heading into spring. And the reflections that I have to share on her character in particular are really a kind of a reframing of perhaps previous narratives that have been portraying this hag archetype in a threatening light, or insinuating that death is a scary presence and dark and foreboding, something to really be avoided, not to be interacted with. And I believe that level of kind of cultural, social suppression that we currently have, at least I can speak from a UK-centric perspective, it has not always been this way. Practices, ritual around the very, very normal cycles, everyday cycles of life, death and rebirth have always been present, and to reflect on ancient cultural practice and to try and ascertain or derive meaning from the little fragments of history that we have, we can see that ritual and ceremony in that regard particularly with this transition into the underworld, is something that's been long explored, long studied, vastly documented and written about, but also the missing pieces that we can only stretch our imagination to are those that have been perhaps lost in oral tradition or transmission from ancestral connections down the line because of cultural suppression and colonial influences trying to impose structures to control, to dominate, to create form and purpose for a larger amount of people in a more linear way. And I suppose I think about it in relation to individual families and clan groups and maybe slightly larger communities that we may define as tribes. And depending on geography, depending on personal history, depending on landscape, there would be, and there is, as evidenced in other cultures across the world, a very individual sense of practice in relation to dealing with life and dealing with death and everything in between. And that individuality is important. It gives structure and meaning and definition and character to different groups. And the relevance of that in terms of a connection to space, environment, relationship to land, which for me personally is really important. And within my framework of interacting with and understanding the Celtic tradition and within my own practices, that land-based spirituality or land-based ritual and practice is the key. It is the doorway, it is the portal, it is the bridge between worlds. And of course, the variety of landscape that is present, the variety of microclimate, the variety of natural resources, and the tools that are available to people to be able to navigate these transitions between life and death would vary. So in that sense, I suppose I'm affirming that I feel it's an important thing to maintain and feel comfortable in having one's own personal outlook or practice in relation to this subject, and potentially a unique way of holding space for that. And it wouldn't be abnormal, and it wouldn't be wrong or incorrect to have your own framework established depending on who you are and where you're from and what you have available to you in your environment. So to continue with that thread of thought around variety and a kind of affirmation, I guess, that is significant and it is important, and the spectrum of cultural practice that is expressed is important to acknowledge, so that we can celebrate diversity and that we can learn from each other, that we can make comparisons, not to make judgments of hierarchy or define one way as a better way, but to understand that there is a spectrum, there is a range of approaches to processing and dealing with different stages and phases of the life experience. And to be limited or confined by an overarching hierarchical structure which intends to impose value systems which are not necessarily relevant to that individual clan or tribe group, only serves to create trauma to personal history and to the potential to create new narratives and new stories that are rooted and connected to some sense of groundedness and some sense of identity. So looking at creation, myths and stories and legends as an example of that is perhaps a good reference point to kind of ground that concept. Those creation stories born out of a sense of trying to create structure and community and a tangible sense of identity, like where am I from, where are my people from, what is our outlook, what are our ethics, what are our value systems, what is the lens through which that we view the world. Having a connection on some level to those early stories gives us an opportunity to continue to come back to this point of reflection, this seed that's been planted, this kind of consciousness or awareness, self-awareness. And along the timeline of history, of happenings and interactions and conflicts and engagements with other groups with different perspectives or any number of possibilities unfolding, there is some continuity, there is some relationship to and some kind of like attraction returning to a place of home or a point of origin. And for sure within the Celtic tradition, that relationship is something that has been damaged to a great extent, and along with it, our connection to a language of dreaming, of being able to create stories and to utilize creative energy to project forward potentials, to dream into life, to gather into a space of believing that it is possible to affect change, and believing that it is possible to cast and plant seeds of intention, and that one has the capacity to nurture those and to be able to move forward with ideas in a way that will begin to extend that energy from the internal realm and that imaginal space into a shared collective reality with others, where those things have the potential to become real, to become tangible and solid. And in that sense, there's also been a loss of connection with archetypes, with deities, with wisdom that relates to environment, knowledge of plant medicine, knowledge of crafts and skills that relate to survival and the natural environment, knowledge and awareness of caregiving and caretaking to the natural environment, and how we share, communicate, educate, and relate to each other in, yes, practical respects, but also as sovereign beings within communities in a spiritual sense. How do we express our spiritual identity and our connection to whatever our perceptions of the divine are and the divine within us is, when there has been the extent of a fragmentation of transmission, storytelling, where now we have a saturation of information, and the bridges between our shamanic birthright and our identities within that context, and the story-making machine that drives commerce and weaves narratives to meet its own end in terms of creating identities or products for people to consume or buy into. That kind of reality fantasy bridge seems to be becoming entangled, enmeshed in a way that it can, on first glance, appear difficult to discern, from where does this come from? Is this a fictitious character or archetype born out of a Disney realm imagining? Is this archetype based on a long-standing tribal connection to place or space? And I have engaged with other perceptions of criticism and commentary on this, and I would tend to agree that there has been a fetishization of connecting to kind of ancient totems of spirituality, say, that are, you know, very much from the past, evidenced by a sort of like a renaissance or like a trend of like a certain period of time becoming in vogue, like that fashion sensibility, or that a practice from a certain period of time will suddenly kind of emerge from the ashes, so to speak, and kind of be presented on a platter as like, this is the authentic practice from this this culture, and in this shamanic context, this is the way, the one true way. And I cannot align or resonate with that, because it's not contemporary, it doesn't bear relevance to the here and now piece of connecting with those realms, which can be as close as the air that we breathe and the space that we inhabit, and the veils can be as present as we are willing to allow them to be in the refinement of our own attunement and alignment and cultivation of that sensitivity and continued dialogue and communication with those spaces through careful, safe preparation of mind, body and spirit and beyond. Connecting to those spaces will always give you some reference point or relevance to this period of time in this moment. Whether it be that you are connecting to ancestors long since past, or connecting to imagery or imaginings of the fullness of, say, a sacred site with stones or structures that is no longer physically present in its, you know, initial form, but there are remnants or elements of that there. I don't mean to suggest that engaging with those qualities of times gone by don't allow us portals for connection. They absolutely do. But there's always a reflection or a mirror or an image or some continuity that grounds those things in the here and now as well, in this space, this sense of like, yes, this is the time that I am in, and I may have been able to cast or stretch or extend timelines, but the presence and the sense of groundedness is rooted in the here and the now. So the reason I wanted to highlight the Cailleach is, yes, that still there are stories, narratives, historical references, pieces of information that are very much portraying her energy as, you know, intimidating, purveyor of darkness, bringer of death. And in my own personal recent experiences with her, I felt that in my inquisitiveness as to the quality of her energy, given the context of my challenge at the time, which was navigating realms of uncertainty, fear, and a lack of clarity in regards to processing a transition of from life to death, I was comforted to meet this really staunch, wise woman energy that it was not intimidating, I think is what I'm trying to say. It was so rooted and so grounded in certainty and in clarity of communication, and with just, I've been here before. I've been here before 1,000 times, and I am a gatekeeper. I am a presence and a strong energy that opens that door and helps with that transition from the upper and middle realms into the underworld. And really, I am a walker between those worlds, or I am a companion or a guide or a wayshower. That was really the quality of energy that I was getting from that dialogue, really clearly, really a kind of quality of rootedness and groundedness that just was undeniable, instantly making you feel trusting and at ease. But that wisdom and that kind of sense of, I'm here to highlight, I'm here to show you, I'm here to forewarn you, I'm here to give you some way markers or points of recognition along the path ahead, which is perhaps unclear, perhaps dark, perhaps unstable underfoot. But I've been there, and I'm coming back into the here and now to give you some tools and some information to help you navigate that space. And that kind of initiatory energy of, like, you know, I'm here behind you, I'm gently pushing you forward, and I am offering you support. And that was the context of that particular interaction, was that there was a request for a presence to be that quality of energy, and it was her that showed up in that respect. So it wasn't an energy to kind of take you by the hand and walk through with you, but more to offer reflections and insights. Hence this, the crone, the hag, the wise woman, the one who knows, the one who sees, the seer. And also in that sense of, like, perspectives of timelines, past, present, future, and where that life, death, rebirth cycle fits into that trajectory, depending on your cosmological view of the world. And this archetype and energy was clearly an expression of energy that was easily able to move between worlds, you know, without any difficulty, had all the necessary tools and skills, languages, passwords, keys, initiations, the relevant initiations to be able to have permission to permeate these different spaces, and to have safe passage. So in respect of my request for a supportive energy, a guiding energy, to offer me safe passage into a doorway of helping an energy transition from this world onto the next, and to kind of safeguard and assist a soul through a process of returning home. I have kind of reframed, I guess, this idea of the crone hag archetype as really being a midwife to the underworld, a death doula, because in that process of death and dying, there is in fact a process of birth and rebirth going on, and kind of harking back to the Celtic tradition and perspective on that, and looking to our close friends within the Irish tradition, of keening, of creating a vehicle of frequency, of expression to guide, to support, to act as a means of transportation to aid that soul in safe passage, and that being a very clear reference point or link to what I would consider a very primal, ritualistic, shamanic activity, and having strong evidence to support a kind of history and context of that practice, although, you know, its documentation only being in more recent times, where that documentation may have been through a lens of analysis or criticism, or you know, an examination that is not necessarily a holistic, sensitive, open-minded, sociological or anthropological piece of research, rather a kind of scrutiny, or a kind of, you know, a criticism of the old ways, perhaps making value judgments about it not being a practice congruent with our modern times, which, you know, I feel I must disagree with, because something so primal as how one interacts with and processes and expresses grief is, you know, something that time immemorial cannot change, and only our attitudes towards what is appropriate or not appropriate, given the constraints and social pressures and structures and expectations that we, you know, are faced with or choose to engage with, having influence or creating an impact on whether we decide to continue with practices like that. And I see that as a very healthy expression and a very helpful, useful means of releasing emotional energy with intention and with purpose. So using that as one example of a Celtic reference point of one ritual and practice associated with that transition into death and beyond, or returning to Anam Cara, which is a really something which is beautifully expressed by John O'Donoghue's writings, which are really worthwhile delving into. Pulling those strands of awareness apart and coming into full presence with one's own personal processing. The reframing of midwifing as the activity or the means or the healing modality, I really feel encapsulated the multifaceted complexity and tapestry of this archetype of the Cailleach, because it honours the three faces and stages of the kind of feminine archetype of maiden, mother and crone, by understanding that one cannot transition between these different stages without certain elements of initiation, and without giving adequate space to honour the transition between these different stages and what they represent. And that as that crone element and the qualities that are tied into that are so close to death as an experience and as an entity, it makes sense that in the suppression of ritual and practice and healing activity surrounding these pivotal life changes would lead to a detachment, would lead to fear, would lead to confusion, misunderstanding, misrepresentation of this quality of energy, to move away from a sense of what it means to age to learn, to change, to evolve, and to move into new phases of maturity, is to create some sort of void or huge amount of space between our perceptions of the height of our essence, or the peak of our life force energy, or the, you know, the best moments of life being confined and limited to youth, and to kind of a quality of naivety, or an age of innocence, and casts the other end of the spectrum of the shadows, of the night, of darkness, you know, of fatigue, deterioration, as having inherently negative connotations or qualities that then become, you know, things that we feel we want to retract from, that we want to resist, that we feel uncomfortable viewing that, facing that, talking to that, experiencing that. And I think that creates a social severing between age groups, and a generational kind of severing as well within our kind of cultural shared spaces, and our perceptions about what is appropriate and not appropriate, and how we form relationships, and what's okay, and, you know, this kind of fragmentation, which leads to separation and disconnection, and reframing the hag as this doula, as this midwife, allowed there to be softer elements of that kind of divine feminine quality start to come in, and the softer elements have come through the weathering of time, the softening, the aging of the skin, the softening of the body, as it moves from different transitions and states of fecundity and fertility into phases of pregnancy, where there's an unfolding and ripening, all of which are alluding to and leading towards a phase or a state of maturity. And these softer elements, it would be false, I think, to assume that soft and vulnerable means weak or submissive or without substance or structure. In fact, the firmness and the fierceness and the suppleness and the potency of the more youthful life force has to be incredibly strong and resilient to take that level of direct interaction and manipulation and life experience coming to shape and to work with, and that energy requiring a level of openness and vulnerability to be supple enough to allow that force to come into that space and penetrate, not to the point of fracture, which would be the case if it was so tight and rigid that, like a branch that was not nourished but dry, it would break, rather than to bend and flow and move and adapt and over time age and soften and become wizened or wizened with experience and information and knowledge. That the strength required to maintain visibility in aspects of emotional softness, as far as the capacity to comfort, to reassure, to nurture, to mother, to affirm, to support, to hold space for, comes through a great strength, a rootedness, a connection that is inherently grounded, practical, pragmatic, is not desensitized to gore, to blood, to death, in the sense of those are still primal, animalistic experiences that elicit potent responses and feelings, but has been and done and lived through these cycles and transitions enough time to soften towards them, to not see them as threatening, to see them as familiar, as part of the tapestry of life, and to hold no judgment or criticism or shameful attitudes towards any of these shades of experience. So for an archetypal energy to be so stoic and assured and humbled by multiple experiences many times over of life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, in all of its many guises, carves a hag who has the strength to provide that quality of ancestral support, of being behind, guiding, gently encouraging, with the staff, with the journey stick, has been, has come back, has been, has come back, doesn't rush, doesn't try and instigate energy through aggression or dominance. But equally, in this journeying between worlds, has seen all of the manifestations of and projections and fear and anxiety and mistrust towards this portal of what is this space of the unknown when we move into the underworld? What lies ahead? We don't get to continue to come back and forth within the spirit world from that place easily without energy being exchanged or consumed, because we're feeding into a much bigger energetic cycle of giving and taking and consumption, attraction, expiation, and so it continues. Growth, feeding new life, falling away, nourishing the next phase, and so it goes on. So I would encourage dialogue, and I would encourage an invitation of this archetype and this energy into your field of awareness, into your meditation, into your personal spiritual practice, into your interest, research, reading, into your personal dialogue, with the consideration that she may be one who talks freely, openly, and with comfort to death, but that does not make her quality or intention one of negativity, one of ill wishes, one of draining or imbalance, unequal exchange. She is a communicator with the language and the tools to help us be at peace with death as a part of life and rebirth as the next phase into acceptance of the reality that things are always changing and don't always stay the same. So my thanks and blessings to the Cailleach, and may she bring you strength in your hour of need.